Welcome everyone to another Beyond All Reason video. I hope you get value out of today's video, and if you do, I would definitely appreciate a tickle of the like button. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for more videos dropping soon. I have a Twitch channel, and my wife has a jewelry store. Links are in the description below. Any support is appreciated. Now let's get into the video. Welcome to another Beyond All Reason video. Today we're going to be looking at Cortex and just a couple of their units and the strengths and weaknesses of each of them. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about economy towards the end, but not too much. So first off, we have the rating bots for Cortex. Now everyone knows and loves the Grunt, and he is notorious for being a little bit stronger than the pawn if used properly. Now, based on stats, the pawn is a bit weaker, but only, based on stats, the grunt is a little bit weaker, but only if the person using the grunt does not know how to use them. So the advantage of the grunt is its range. It has a slightly larger damage range compared to the pawn. The pawn would only be about to there. So you can micro yourself to attack a pawn from a distance while not being hit yourself. So that is one benefit of the grunt, but it has to be microed very carefully. So something that you have to be just mindful of when using them. Otherwise, they are weaker than the pawn. The pawn is able to do 90 damage per second, whereas this thing at point blank is able to do 74 damage, okay? So definitely micro these guys very carefully if you're going up against a bunch of pawns. Now the Fiend is a T2 unit, very effective. This thing has a pretty interesting special ability, and that is when it dies, it explodes into and does like a larger explosion to units around it. So it's very fast, has a speed of 83, which this has a speed of 84. So it's barely slower than a grunt, not enough to like matter. It does a big area of effect damage, which makes it very effective at killing groups of enemies, and it also has an explosion damage when it self-destructs. So it can either die and explode and cause damage to things around it, or you can self-destruct them and they're like little mines that will blow up. So they blow up really rapidly and they do damage to things around them. So a very effective late game raiding bot. Definitely try to find holes in people's defenses and push those into their back line and try to take out some economy with them. Okay, next we have the what I would call support bots. I find that that's a good name for all of these. Anyway, we start with the Sheldon. It is a T2. It has a very long range. This is kind of similar to the Cortex's sniper bot, but it just doesn't do anywhere near the same amount of damage. It has 65 damage per second, and it's pretty slow with a speed of 50, so nowhere near as fast as a grunt or a fiend. But that's a common theme with most Cortex bots, is they are a little bit slower, but also pack a little bit more damage. So the vision on this thing, the LOS line of sight is only 300, so it's pretty low, not a very good solo. Similar to how a sniper would be bad if it's alone. It has a pretty fast firing rate, but each shot is pretty weak. So these are a support unit that you'll want to back up your front line with more than anything because of its range. It can attack from a distance pretty far away and stay out of harm's way. I would definitely recommend using these guys with a radar bot and a radar jammer, because that helps keep them from taking damage from other artillery shots, or um, tanks and things, just based on the radar signature. So a good support unit. Not always the best going solo with them unless you have a very large quantity. Next up we have the Arbiter, which is a rocket bot. This thing has an even further attack range from the Sheldon. So this thing is very, very strong at static defenses, or just any units that are an artillery style unit. You can put in some hurt on these guys. As long as you have a radar signature, you can just have them in the back and your front line will take all the hits and these guys will bombard them. So a very effective unit if you feel like there's a bit of a stalemate. Then of course we have the rocket bot, which is very similar to the Armada rocket bot, but I believe it's a little bit slower firing. It has only 43 DPS per second. I don't have the Armada lined up here, or like their exact stats, so I'm not sure what all the trade-offs are for it, but these are really just effective at taking out static defenses and also effective at harassment. They have a speed of 48, which is slower than even a Sheldon, which has a speed of 50. So definitely good for like early game harassment and just taking out static defenses and such. But I don't really love using these, just because their metal is a bit more, it's 110 versus a grunt being 36, and the grunt does almost, a little bit more damage than the rocket bot does. Even it just has a shorter range, so, but it's also faster, so there's trade-offs, a little bit less health as well. So but really with Cortex, their T1 bots, which this is a T1, are generally pretty weak. They don't cost as much metal, and they're just a lot less tanky than Armada's T1. So I find T1 for Armada, or for Cortex, to be a little bit more tricky, where you have to finesse things and just make sure you don't get overwhelmed, and you just kind of have to throw a lot more numbers compared to Armada in the T1 phase. Okay. And then the Thug. The Thug is actually pretty good. It's very similar to the Mace, but it has a little bit more health. And I believe it has a slightly longer firing range as well. So a very, very effective unit. And this is kind of going to be your core for Cortex bots. This will be the bulk of what you're making your army full of. So uh, try to, I think with Cortex, you're going to want to try to get out of T1 a little bit more rapidly than you would with Armada, just because you have a lot less variety, especially on the side of the bots. Okay. And now we also have the Thrasher. This is amphibious, which means it can go in the water, and it's just a basic anti-air, a very effective unit. If you are having lots of problems with air, it's always good to have like one of these in your army composition, just to be able to push back on any air attacks that do come out. But this is a T1 air defense. They also have basically the same thing for T2 air, and they're both very effective. So if you're having a problem with air, definitely throw some of those in your composition. Now, where I believe Cortex really shines is its Mammoth. This thing is notoriously slow with a speed of 23, so it's not good at rotations, but it is very, very strong. It has 15,000 health. It's incredibly tanky, okay? So it's a very solid frontline unit that can just absorb hits while also doing really quite incredible damage. It does up to 500 damage if it gets close to things. Um, so if you'd have seen some of my other videos, I wasn't entirely sure on what the varying in DPS is here down below, but I came to find out that the damage per second varies due to the range of the attack. So at the very furthest point, it's going to be doing 250 damage every second. At the very closest point, it's going to be doing 500 damage per second. So try to abuse that if you can with your laser weapons to try to push up on people and do a little bit extra damage with them. Just, you know, back them into a corner and try to get the most you can out of each shot. So that would be the best way to use laser weapons, is taking ground and pushing your enemy to get them closer to you so that you're doing more. The sumo is a bit faster, which is funny to say because it's still really slow, but it is faster than the mammoth, and it is a very strong unit. This thing has 500 or 5,000 health, so it's about 3 times less than the mammoth, but it also has a damage of 300. The only problem with the sumo is it's got a very limited range, whereas the mammoth has a very large range, to the point where you can even take out a lot of longer ranged artillery and stuff with it. So it's very good at pushing through front lines and taking them out, whereas the sumo is more of an early like defense for when you just get T2 out and you need something a little bit faster that can, you know, take out some T1 units. The sumo is pretty good at like just holding the front line early game, whereas you're going to want to transition into the mammoth for the late game. Anyway, the Armada tanky bots, especially tier 2, is really, or the Cortex tanky, sorry. Cortex T2 bots are really where you're going to shine using Cortex. But that does come at a cost, and the cost is with your economy. Gen, all of your economy stuff, except for your solar panels, are a little bit more expensive than Armada. But the firepower that you gain from that cost is well worth it. You just have to play a little bit differently on how and when you're aggressing with Cortex, because you have a bit of a different power spike. So Armada's power spike is kind of like this here, and then it kind of trails off, whereas Cortex power spike is more of a like low and then a giant, like as it scales further than Armada, whereas Armada starts out stronger and then kind of drops off on how effective their units get. So that's why you have such a significant energy cost in and like metal cost in all of your buildings that produce for your economy. So don't be discouraged by that. It's part of the game, and it's very well balanced in my opinion. I really think that both factions are very effective at their purpose. So that is all for this one, and I'll see you next video.